Hello, everyone. Thank you for visiting my channel, Educational Norm. I work as an educational consultant, which means that I have the opportunity to interact and visit with many teachers across Ohio and beyond. Those interactions have driven me to tell their stories and their ideas on education. The goal of Educational Norm is to provide an informational network that focuses on positive aspects of education, the people preparing students for the future of our world. Join us each week for a new interview, and please subscribe and share the channel with others that you think may enjoy the program. Thank you and enjoy the show. Hello, everyone. Today we are here with Kayla Crist. Kayla is a certified trauma and resilience specialist. We'll get into that very deeply. She's also the founder of the Kindness Campaign. She homeschools five of her own children, and she is really big into making sure that she's teaching the whole child. I am looking forward to this because Kayla and I have been friends for 30 years, and she's been a student of mine in middle school, helped me
Yeah.
out in high school when I was coaching. Just an all-around great person, and I think you're going to find out the same thing in this discussion. So welcome, Kayla.
Hello. Yes, I also love our 30 years of friendship. So good to be
It's
here.
crazy because I'm only 30 years old, so I don't know how that happened. It's all
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, I think
So,
about if you would have told seventh grade Kayla that we would have a friendship 3 decades later, I think she would have been very surprised because you were just like that handsome young teacher playing football, just played football at Adrian College. And here we are,
yes,
aging gracefully.
very gracefully, and I did not pay her to say that for anybody that might be asking. It was simply out of the kindness of her heart because she is so kind. Hence the kindness campaign and other things, but we'll get into. So, as I told you before we started, there are so many people that are interested in what you do and your ideas behind what you do. So let's get right into what is a certified trauma and resilience specialist?
Okay, so my master's is in education. And so my favorite thing to talk about and to study is all things education, especially education when we're talking about outside of the traditional format, um, which I absolutely love public school. I just know that in our public schools, um, we're limited and we're a little bit stretched. And so the specialty that I have is to look at education through the lens of what it means to be going to school each day and trying to learn when you're also carrying acute or developmental trauma. So acute would be something similar to my husband. He witnessed and he found his brother had drowned when he was 7. And so he was up in his playhouse, looked down from the tree house, actually saw his 3-year-old brother face down in the pool. And his brother ends up passing away 3 weeks later after being on life support. So this is acute trauma. So this is a specific point in history and the center of your brain is disrupted and has to work very hard and sometimes successfully can heal from that. And other times there has to be interventions. But sadly, that event, for example, that was in the late 80s. And most people have lived with different forms of trauma without someone coming alongside and identifying that that's trauma and then having the tools to know how to help that person go from um, a disrupted life that will have mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, all sorts of symptoms that accompany that event. And very few people know how to help that person get to a point of resiliency. So that would be acute. Developmental trauma would be something that I'm very passionate about in my area. For example, our largest public high school, you would see lots of developmental trauma, meaning a person is in a home where there may not be adequate adult supervision or presence of an adult. So you might run into things like food insecurity, domestic violence, but things that are happening to cause compounded stress, and it's daily and it's inescapable. So my passion, my specialty is to help identify that this is a trauma situation because the symptoms oftentimes will look like mental health or physical symptoms. And so helping to differentiate, is this a mental health issue? Is this a physical health issue? Or is this evidence that this student is carrying unresolved trauma.
So if I'm a teacher in a classroom and I have somebody that's developmentally going through trauma, what does that manifest? How does that look to me in a kid that's coming into my classroom?
Okay, so if we're talking just visually, a lot of times you'll see a student that can't sit still. So they might be asking to go to the bathroom often, sharpening their pencils. Literally, their body just moves and moves and moves and moves and moves. And we know from a science standpoint that trauma in the center of their brain is most likely telling them you have to move to survive. If you sit still, that's when danger comes. And so this is a very instinctual, a lot of times this is subconscious. That student wouldn't be aware that that's why they're moving. You may see a student that has a lack of eye contact. So one of the major trauma, the words that we would use when we're talking about trauma is they have the experience of terror. So that's different than, for example, if a student loses a parent, they would be experiencing grief, and grief would, the word we would associate is sadness. So a trauma experience with that student is in some way, shape, or form, they are dealing with terror every single day. And sometimes they're aware and sometimes they're not, but the distinctive piece is that their brain is always aware, and it's almost as though a terror switch got flipped on and cannot turn itself off. But I think those would be the two marked things, is a student that seems very disengaged, unable or unwilling to make eye contact with you, or a student that is disruptive and very busy.
Well, now I'm thinking back to my entire teaching career in middle school, and a lot of what you're saying also describes adolescence. So it's really important to build those relationships to really find out why those behaviors are happening. Is it because of adolescence and puberty and the hormones, or is it trauma? So with that being said, tell me about your view on the importance of relationships in a classroom.
Yeah, I made a note. If you weren't going to bring this up, I was going to bring this up because this your audience may not have experienced you as an educator in the classroom. And so I want your audience to know that one of your greatest strengths in the world of education, I am witness to this, is what I call relational equity. So a lot of times equity right now is a buzzword. So is trauma. These are words that we're hearing a lot about, and sometimes we're using them inappropriately. But the use of the word equity that I'm talking about is not equality. I'm talking about equity the way that you would use that word in the banking industry. So think of paying your mortgage every single month. So how would we identify and be able to separate trauma in adolescence from normal? I mean, middle schoolers are weird, right?
That's
So
why I love
we could also talk about the trauma that the middle school educators have to deal with. But the one piece that's going to be an important piece is there's not a diagnostic. I can't give you a checklist the way that sometimes we can do with ADD or other learning disabilities. Instead, we have to leverage this beautiful thing called relational equity. And so, Norm Powder, this is what we experienced with you. So, relational equity is like paying your mortgage every single month. And after a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, you've now got this beautiful equity in your home that gives you this credit if you want to do something bigger and better. So in a classroom, it's very, very simple. It's these simple little investments that we're doing to treat that student as though they're not a student, but they're a human and they're an individual. So we're taking them out of that general population and we're making them very, very special. So simple things like using their name, greeting them. I've seen this beautiful video. I don't know if you attach links, but you could attach the link. I'd be happy to give it to you. But this beautiful teacher or example where this teacher every single day with every single student stands outside of his classroom and has a unique handshake that he does with each of his students. and they're
Excellent.
quick. Yeah, they're like 5 seconds long. Um, but it's such a it's a really, really great example of relational equity because even if that student only gets that 5 minutes or 5 seconds, they knew every single day that to that teacher, they were important and they were special and set apart.
Yeah, I love that. I always appreciate the individual as much as I can. It was I love the way you put it, and I never thought of me doing that in
Hmm.
that way. To me, it was just being human and
Hmm.
trying to reach other human beings. And I
Yep.
think that I put more time in with the kids than I do with my colleagues. And I sometimes regret that, but I don't regret it for the students.
Yeah.
It's
Yep.
awesome. Well, thank
Yeah.
you for that. That was nice.
Yeah. Well, and I think that you and I do see the world through that lens, that it would be a normal thing, but actually, social exclusion is actually the norm, meaning we're all collectively in one space, but we don't engage with each other. We aren't the first person to say hi, and we actually function as I always think about Hawaii. Hawaii, I believe, has 133 islands, but collectively, they are the state of Hawaii. So sometimes, 133 people can all be in the same space, but each one is its own entity and not necessarily creating bridges. So, yeah, you definitely did that for
Well,
sure. Relational
again,
equity.
thank you for pointing out how I taught because it's been a while, and that was 1992.
Yeah.
So it's good to reach back and remember the memories. And honestly, I think that the more I taught, sometimes I would forget about the things that worked the first couple years that I taught. Uh, that very first year that I taught in the school that we were in, we had 5 students pass away,
Yeah.
and that made me mature very fast as a teacher.
Hmm.
And a lot of your friends were in that classroom with one of the students that passed away, and we went through that together. And knowing a shared trauma, I'm sure has huge impact on being able to move forward.
Hmm.
Whereas what you're describing, if we don't know, then they're almost on an island by themselves until we build that relationship with the child.
Yes. Yep. So, and then you brought up those would be, acute trauma, and those were major events, not just in your life, but those were formative for the people that were rubbing shoulders in 1992, 93. We'll just call it the era of New Kids on the Block because that's the way I think of it. But
Uh,
sometimes when we use the word trauma, sometimes we're overwhelmed because the word itself is very dramatic and it has this emotional weight to it. But one of my favorite things that I want to mention, because if I get to leave your audience with anything, this is what I want them, this would be the takeaway. Um, the gigantic, hopeful piece of trauma-informed education is that all we have to do, and it sounds simple, but this isn't, by the way, this isn't my opinion. This is research supported. This is what we know in the world of trauma-informed education is that for a student to have a traumatic event, but not experience trauma, meaning PTSD, it takes just one caring relationship. Ideally, we want that to be with an adult, but let's say, actually, you've told me this story before. After, I don't know if you were comfortable us using names, but after one of your students that had passed away, you met with the students in that grade in your classroom informally, I believe, after school. And so, not being trauma informed, because 30 years ago we weren't talking about trauma informed education, you didn't know from an educational standpoint, but you knew instinctually that these kids needed an adult to walk through them or walk with them through something that was unprecedented in their life and in the middle school. So you did this thing and you made yourself available. Very likely that you actually were preventing PTSD for those students.
wow.
Yes. So, on a personal note, I mentioned my husband's story, and my husband was dealing with PTSD between the ages of 7. And I'm just going to say this. I entered the story when he was 15. So, for about 8 years, um, I know that his family did the very, very best that they could because these situations are uncharted and there's not a playbook to follow.
Mhm.
But for about 8 years, there was a trauma experience. Then he and I developed this friendship, and even though I wasn't a caring adult, we can look back historically and we can see that PTSD started to decrease. And he would tell you if he was here that he doesn't struggle with trauma indicators or trauma markers, even though he witnessed something that was so horrific. So having one person that anchors you really is, it really is the secret.
Well, I think that in his situation, I'm sure majority of the family was dealing with their own trauma. So that would be very hard to find somebody else to walk through since they're trying to learn how to deal with it as well. So
Yeah.
I'm sure it was a little bit harder in that situation. And
Yeah.
as bringing back the discussion of the student, to me, it
Mhm.
was just what was natural. It was these kids were hurting. I was hurting. Let's share our memories that were pleasant of this student and remember what was great about that person rather than just wallowing in the sorrow. Let's remember him the way he would want to be remembered. And it was impactful not just for them, but for me. It helped me as well cope with losing a student. I was 23 years old. The year prior, I'm in college having a grand old time with very little responsibility. And now this happens. So you have to become pretty mature pretty quickly for a group of, it was probably 23 kids in that classroom very quickly. It was very hard, but it was something that, just instinctually, I think as an adult, you just want to make the pain go away. And you weren't going to be able to do that. So again, thank you for telling me how I handled things. I,
Mhm.
I didn't know.
Mhm.
Um, but you mentioned something earlier that I want to go back and highlight the practical nature of what you told teachers that they could do just by building that simple relationship
Mhm.
to build the equity. That
Mhm.
is exactly what I think people are looking for. How can I do this? And you made it sound very simple by connecting with your kids.
Mhm.
And that's sometimes difficult when you have 150, but
Mhm.
you have given examples of meeting them at the door and, just having conversations with them. Do you have any other suggestions on how you can help build that relationship if that's not a natural thing for a teacher?
Mhm. I think that what I would do if I was back in the classroom, or let's say that this was like a professional development training. So our greatest predictor of whether or not students are going to be healthy and whole and successful and contributing to society in a positive way is their emotional intelligence and their emotional health. So this is a new way to look at our definition of success. Prior to this type of thinking, we were thinking about things like GPAs and rigorous curriculum, which, oh, we should do another episode sometime about my thoughts on rigorous curriculum and how that is a Latin word that means boredom, basically.
Oh,
That's
there you
my own
go.
paraphrase, but you can look it up. The word rigor in Latin is not a word that we should be using when we talk about education. The goal would be, and this is what I would say to summarize like maybe an hour of professional development, is I would say the goal is every child every day. And that is a daunting goal. So, what we would want to do is we'd want to be proactive. So, before the school year has even started, we would want a cheat sheet. And I'm a very visual learner. So, you've been in our home. I have schedules, I have things that are important in our home. I literally have 12 hours, 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. written on our French doors because I don't want to forget what my priorities are for those work hours. Um, so I would encourage teachers to do the same thing. If we're sloppy about it and not intentional, it will not happen. If we have 150 kids, then we need to have some type of visual reminder. So it's simple things, real simple things. Simple but requires intentionality. So I'm a big advocate of physical touch. I know that we have to be careful and we have to be thoughtful, but we also don't have to be so dogmatic that because we're afraid of that physical touch component and what could happen and accusations that we do this knee-jerk reaction and we never touch a kid. Kids that are dealing with trauma, a lot of times they do need that hand on the shoulder or something. And by the way, we're like in a public classroom. And so there is a safety to that we can appropriately apply physical touch in a way that's helpful and healing. So something like that, a high five, asking them about their day, putting them in a scenario where you can tell like, okay, their body language, they seem to be safer when they're sitting by Xavier, for example. So looking for those cues that are going to be subtle, but the evidence is there.
The hand to the shoulder to me is a very comforting thing, and I don't think it's ever misinterpreted. And I've done that a lot of times. I think where people get a little nervous, especially in the elementary, because elementary kids are so huggy, they want to hug everybody if
Yeah.
they love them. It's just a natural thing. So I agree with that touch. I've actually run across a lot of high school kids that like a handshake.
Yep.
They'll stick out their hand first just to do a handshake, which
Ah.
it's fun. It's just like, oh, really? That's a new one. Because I never did handshakes in middle school. Fist
Mhm.
bumps, high fives, those type of things, they go a long way.
Yeah.
And again, that relationship allows you to do that simple touch without the underlying fear of, oh, this is going to be interpreted the wrong way.
Mhm.
So I think again, that relationship piece is huge to be able to do and have those connections with kids.
Yeah,
Um,
I use with the kids that I teach, I use a simple phrase. I'm not sure that I coined it, but possibly I did. But I just ask them high five, hug, or handshake. In other words, we're going to connect in some way, but I'm giving you the power and you get to leverage which one you want that to be. Um, so I could say something else about how to do this. If you wanted, but
yeah,
it's just
yeah,
a quick tangent. Okay.
yeah.
Um, one of the things, if we really want to care about students holistically, and if we buy into the idea that if they are dealing with acute or developmental trauma, that they're actually not even able, their brain is not able to receive the lesson plans and the content that I am so passionate about, then two things we should consider. A, assignments, regardless of the subject matter, that are meaningful. So, yes, there is a place where we have to do quantitative research, and it's very hard to attach meaning to these types of things. And there is just geometry and chemistry. But as often as we can, we wanted to craft our subjects around something that would connect with that student on a personal level or create meaning for them within their own community or igniting, okay, so they won't always be in my classroom. Let me design a lesson that's actually going to inspire and create some enthusiasm for where they'll be post graduation. So anytime that our lesson plans are going to activate meaning, this is going to be very helpful for a student that is struggling with trauma because that traumatized student, their brain is activated all day long.
Mhm.
And it's an exhausting process. So when we're giving them what is that word? Like um what is that word when you're doing lesson plans that are not meaningful? Like,
Oh, the well, there's several ways you can address that. I mean, they're they're not important. They're trivial.
yeah.
We get it. We get
Anyways,
fill in
anyways,
your own word
so
there.
there's like a not nice word for that. But anyways, those types of assignments are going to be very triggering. And you're going to see a student with trauma, that's when they're going to start misbehaving. There is this beautiful program called Miss Kendra, and this would be a junior high, although you could do this at all grade levels. But Miss Kendra is a trained trauma educator that comes into classrooms, and once a week or once a month, they pause curriculum for just that 30-minute window. And Miss Kendra, she allows students to write her a letter. And it's simple, it can be a letter, a picture, or whatever. And it's this safe space between the student and Miss Kendra, and her promise to students is that anything that you write to me is A, just between us, and B, I will always write back. So is that something that a classroom teacher can do daily? No. Would it be fruitful and beneficial and maybe reap some incredible benefits down the road if they were to stop and to do a similar approach once a month? Absolutely. Maybe that's not practical. You could even do it once a quarter, and I think you would still see relational equity increase with those students.
Well, you mentioned, is it possible the time factor that you're going to use to do that? Writing everybody a letter does take time. Having them do a letter does take time out of your schedule. But if you don't start making those connections, you're going to be using that time in a different way down the road to deal with the trauma in your classroom in a different way. It could be bad behaviors or it could be disengagement or whatever it may be. So you almost have to pick, is the return on investment of time doing this more
Mhm.
beneficial for the kids or less beneficial? And will
Yeah.
it help the class overall? So I do think that that's one thing I hear constantly is we don't have enough time to do our curriculum. How are we going to do these other things?
Yeah.
But like I know you believe this, there's a balance of what is needed for the child versus your content.
Yeah. I also believe very strongly that if we put less emphasis on IQ and content, and we put more emphasis on relationship and EQ, what you would actually see is that students, instead of checking boxes and doing assignments and busy work, that's the phrase, I was looking for the word busy work, less busy work and more meaningful work, then you'd actually have students. I saw this with my my oldest two boys, excuse me, that are in ninth and 10th grade now. The less that I did in terms of just pushing content and assignments, and we got to get through, and I did more balance, to use your word, with EQ and relational equity. What I saw is that the assignments that I did give, they were doing this from a place of genuine interest and they were diving deeper on their own. So intrinsic motivation was incredibly high with my oldest two, and it has been true with my younger three as well. But simply because I created space by not overwhelming them with busy work.
Well, and I think the huge advantage you have is obviously you know your own children very well, so you
Mhm.
can make those recommendations of where they can take their path to learn.
Yeah.
And that again takes time. It wasn't something that just happened. Oh, they're my child, so I know them. No, some children close down and you don't know everything about them. So knowing your student, and in your case, your own children, really helps you prepare for them in a better way that's going to be more effective for their learning.
Yes. Yes.
So let's get into your teaching because I know obviously you've already said it on this broadcast and we've talked about this that you are not against public schools. There's just a lot of trauma and other things that go on in
Mhm.
public schools that you wanted to make sure your kids were given the best possible venue for their own learning and their own growth and development. And your older two, I believe, are in public schools right now in high school. So it's not, again, I want to make it very clear to the audience. When you hear homeschool, I'm sure you have this image of what they think it is, but I
Yeah.
want you to tell us, how you approach it. And obviously you have an educational background,
Yeah.
but also you have this other aspect of religion in your family, and you have the aspect of your trauma specialist, your trauma and resilience specialist. So take me through your homeschooling day or week or however you want to do it to show us what you do for your own kids.
Okay. Yeah. And homeschooling, by the way, was a big surprise to Dan and I. I. I'm not proud of this, but 12 years ago, before we were homeschooling, we were very anti-homeschooling because the stereotypes, they exist for a reason. And we had seen quite a few very poor examples of homeschooling where those children were very isolated. A lot of people would homeschool for political reasons, which is not at all true for us. We're political orphans, as you know. And so the motivation for us was one major factor. A, whoever spends the most time with that student has the greatest influence. Well, I'm not saying this from a place of pride, but my husband and I wanted to be the greatest influences in our children's lives, because we are very pleased with, we live from a place of peace and joy most days. And so we wanted to pass on some things that we had, maybe some wisdom that we had gathered over the last couple decades. My husband is also an educator. He taught chemistry and physics before he went to seminary. So we both love education and love learning. But our number one reason why we homeschooled, and initially it was just a 1 year experience. I had taught kindergarten. It still is my favorite grade by far. My youngest is in kindergarten this year. In a public school, he'd be in first grade, but in our home, he's doing kindergarten again because I love it. I love it so much. So call it what you want. But he is 6.5, and in our home, that is still kindergarten. So our original motivation was to just do this for 1 year. I wanted to be my boys' kindergarten teacher. And I knew them well enough to know that at least the school that I had taught kindergarten at, my oldest is a kinesthetic learner. To the extreme. So if you're familiar with Howard Gardner, he is kinesthetic. He has to move to engage his brain. And this would have been detrimental to him at the school that I had been employed at. So I saw 5-year-olds regularly, and this might shock your audience, but even in 2001, 2002, when I was still teaching, the school that I taught at still had corporal punishment.
Oh, wow.
Crazy.
That is,
Um,
wow.
yep, with parent permission and parents, it was just one of the waivers that they signed at the beginning of the school year. But teachers could send disruptive or busy students out of their classroom down to the principal for a spanking. So I never did that ever. Um, but that was kind of the culture of the school that I was teaching at. So
Wow.
I learned from that, from those initial years teaching kindergarten, that boys and girls, some of them, they just need to move. And my oldest would have regularly been in trouble for things that were natural to him, to his mind and body, which are not separate, we're one being. And I wasn't willing to put him in an environment that felt like he was set up to fail for just being Caden. He's just Caden. So, give you a quick example. We had done a kindergarten co-op. It was in the center of Jackson, Michigan, and downtown. And he was at the playground, and his teacher understandably lost track of him for a minute. And when she found him, he had climbed almost the entire length or height of a telephone pole. So she was upset by that, and she got a hold of me. And I'm going to be honest, Norm, my response was, that is so great. How amazing that he's so talented that at 5 years old, he could do that. And he trusts his body. And I know him. He had been climbing everything since 6 months old. So I was very impressed and I was celebrating that. But a regular teacher would have seen that as misbehavior or problematic behavior. But we just don't view it that way because we are non-conventional. So that was our original reason for doing it. And as my boys transferred in the last year and a half to public school, they are doing wonderful. Could that be happier?
And that was actually to be my next point because I know that they have had great success
Mhm.
making that transition from homeschool to the public school. And also when I was there, you told me that they said, make sure you homeschool the younger three, which
Oh yeah.
is, to me, we're doing the right thing. So that's an amazing thing. And I do love you addressing the fact that there are these stereotypes of homeschool kids.
Mhm.
What I usually saw if we had somebody come in from homeschool when I was in a classroom, their social skills were not the best.
Yeah.
That's the one area that I felt they really struggled. Academically, they were okay,
Yeah.
but that social aspect. But I think that with your setting,
Mhm.
because you have a church that you belong to, that social aspect is sort of built in that community. So I
Sure.
think that helps as well.
Yeah.
Um, Good things. You're doing good things.
Yeah. Well, and we were very intentional. I mean, there are very isolated homeschool families, and you'll actually hear me not be a huge proponent of homeschooling because to do it well, it takes full commitment. It can't be done halfway. And I do see examples within my own circle or my own community that I would encourage those families to do traditional or private school. But what I'm convinced of is that there is not one perfect model for school for every child. And so I believe very fully in let's look at that child and let's craft an education that's best for them. I had one of my five needed. I'm telling you, it was like, this is how they were wired. They needed to be outside. They're very naturalistic minded. And that is one of the multiple intelligence also. So, yeah, I think every child we just look at 1 year at a time, what's the best scenario for them and what do their needs require?
And that's again, that gets into a new buzzword, personalized learning, which you're doing on a daily basis. And when I walk in your house and I see schedules and I see artwork and I see them doing things that are traditional school type activities, but in a very different approach, it makes my heart happy because I know they're getting what they need in the setting that they need to be in, which is
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, it's a
Yes.
good thing.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm going to turn a little bit because I want you to talk a little bit about your kindness campaign.
Hmm.
Um, that really wasn't too much on the table, but it's a
Yeah.
great thing that you do, and I want you to be able to talk about that and promote your kindness campaign because it's a worthwhile cause.
Yeah. The Kindness Campaign is a nonprofit in our area, and my, um, a lot of times when people start something, whether or not they'll be honest and admit it, they really want to see it explode and grow. If I'm honest with you, I really want this sweet little nonprofit to stay tucked into Lenawee County. If other people wanted to take our model and they wanted to take it to their counties or their states, awesome. I would be their biggest cheerleader. Um, but knowing my life and the margin and the boundaries that are important to me, I think that what we're doing right now is about as big as I ever want this to be. But basically, I believe that the power of kindness is exponentially impactful. Um, my brother had passed away in September of 2019, very unexpectedly. And to this day, I will not forget the people that went out of their way to show me love and kindness, because for me, that was acute trauma, struggled terribly with PTSD, specifically insomnia. Um, and I was just devastated, just devastated. And life doesn't really care if you're devastated. You still have to get up every day and take care of your responsibilities. But that was a motivator for me to know that if I am struggling and I'm having to be a mom and a wife, grocery shop, do all of these things, and I am having to carry so much pain and sadness every single day, then how are other people doing this? Because, Norm, as you know, uh, my husband is the greatest to me. He is perfect for me. And I'm very, very spoiled that way. But I also have an incredible group of friends around me that I think not everybody is blessed to have. We have financial resources. And so when I look at the community at large, I see lots of low income families. I see broken relationships and people that are not nearly as fortunate as I am. So I walk through, even Meyer with this curiosity of how are people doing this? How are they managing? We got a message on Monday, just to give you an example, of a 10-year-old who has developed cancer that is now in his bone and his blood. And the worst piece, as if that is not bad enough, is that this cancer is directly connected to, it's called transplant lymphoma, which means it has resulted from an organ transplant that he had previously in life. So this family is they're in it. They're in it. So what the kindness campaign does is we meet once a year. It is ladies only. I know that is not culturally sensitive, but I get the ladies in the room because that's the audience that I feel like I can use my tenacity and I do some speaking, so I can get a captive audience. And we usually have between 250 to we've had about 450 women at our events. And we just do a great job of inspiring kindness because I can affect what? What could I affect? Maybe, well, Jesus affected 12 people, right? 12 disciples. And um, I believe that he was the Son of God. So if Son of God can have an impact on 12 people, then Norm, how many can I impact? Two? One? I don't know. My point is that we genuinely need hundreds of people to be inspired and enthusiastic about taking kindness into their workplace, their family, their neighborhood, their circle of influence, because I am incredibly limited and the impact that I would make is very small. But if we do this times hundreds, now we have made an exponential impact. And so we have a gathering to do that, to inspire that kindness. We actually formulaic, we teach the principles of kindness because what you used the word a couple of times, instinctually, you'd think it was, but it's not. What's actually instinctual is that we would be self-preservationists and self-centered. You know, we're kind of egocentric by nature. So we inspire kindness at these gatherings. And then my favorite part is I unashamedly I ask for money. And I have no interest in that. No one on our team, we have a very large team, receives any funds, and our nonprofit does not receive any funds. So we are literally a conduit for people's donations, and we give 100% of those donations away to unsuspecting recipients within our community.
I love that, and I can't imagine the joy that you bring by being able to do that for a family or a person. And you've shared some of those stories, and it's a great cause. And I love the idea of others taking up the challenge of creating something like this in their own county.
Yeah,
I think it would be something that could be very worthwhile and very rewarding.
yeah,
I think that's a big part of even though we're doing it for other people, there is a little bit of selfishness because you do love helping people and it
yes,
makes you feel good as well.
yes,
So I love that. And I wanted to make sure you had time to share that because our time is running short already. We've talked,
yes,
it's these things go by so fast when the conversation is engaging.
yeah,
Uh, and you have made me very proud to say I've had you in class as part of your pathway to who you are now. I can't say I influenced anything. I just was part of your own specific journey, and I just happened to be there as a cheerleader on the side. So I'm happy to hear what you're doing and see the results that you're getting, not only professionally but personally. You're doing a great job. Your
yeah.
kids are awesome.
Oh, thank you. Well, I do have to say, and you didn't tell me to do this, but I do have to say you were a major influence. So you were the first teacher that I saw that kind of broke the script. And instead of just open book and let's just go through lessons and then let's do a quiz and let's do formative and then summative, instead you were like, let's do something wild and let's act out music videos from the 1960s. Why? Because we're studying the 1960s. And so for the rest of my life, thanks to you, the song Leader of the Pack, because I got to be the one to drive the motorcycle,
The
uh,
chair.
chair, yeah, with leather jacket
You
or
did
just
have a leather jacket on.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, those are treasures, but you were the first one that showed me school can be real fun, real fun. So you and Candy Fritz, I will always um be grateful for the impact that you had on me, and I'm sure that that was the inspiration for me to be a teacher. And I also want to say we're going to be friends forever because of your Jeep. I
Well, when
love
you
your
get
Jeep.
when you finally get your Jeep, when the timing's right, we will go sand duning or something as soon as we
Yes.
can.
Yes. Jeep buddies.
Yes. Well, and to go back to your video, I was going to try to find it because I still have that somewhere around here. When you were in the crash and you were supposed to be dead, you were laughing the entire time. You could not keep a straight face. So
Yeah.
that was fun. And another story about Kayla that I love sharing is that Kayla was not a volleyball player, but I was a volleyball coach, and we had a fairly successful year as a team for the first time in a long time. And all of a sudden, I look down on the bench and Kayla's on my bench sitting there. She goes, I'm taking your stats now. I'm going, oh, all right, that's great. Let's do this. And then you were there the rest of the year. It was awesome.
Well, thanks for embracing my energy. I appreciate that.
It's all good. Well, uh, thank you for your time. And please remember, for those that are watching, to subscribe to the Educational Norm channel. If you need information about what I'm doing or what Kayla's up to or want to be in contact with Kayla, please reach out to me at norm@normpotter.com or visit my website, structuredcreativityconsulting.com. And until next week, as always, be kind, be professional, and find solutions. Thank you, Kayla.
Yes, thank you. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.